This video discusses Chapter 3 from the book Economics After the Crisis. The chapter is about consumption. Chapter 3 consists of 6 sections. We distinguish between individual consumer demand and consumer demand by the state, largely in relation to public goods, and communities, which can consist of the consumption of unpaid goods and services. The diagram shows you 3 opportunity sets of consumption. Opportunity set 1 is with a blue line in a blue shade. It combines 10 healthy meals and 1 pair of sneakers. Opportunity set 2 has more money available for healthy meals because the price of healthy meals went down. So you can still buy 1 pair of sneakers, but now not 10, but 15 healthy meals. Opportunity set 3 is shown with a black line. This dark line shows that you can buy 15 healthy meals with your budget, but also more sneakers. Obviously not 2 whole pairs, so you should go for a bargain that says 2 pairs of sneakers for the price of 1, or a 50% discount for a pair of sneakers. Social economic theory of consumption recognizes that there are many influences on what we want. We distinguish between types of goods and also types of consumers, according to social categories: men and women, youth and elderly, immigrants, and so on. Institutional economic theory recognizes the Veblen effect in consumption. It means that some consumers are willing to pay a high price for a good, even though they can get more or less the same good and quality for a lower price. Why would they do that? Well, perhaps because they want to signal status, that they have enough money to buy a particular good. But it may also solve an information problem. When you have to choose between two different brands for the same product and you don't know anything about these, you probably go for the more expensive one because you assume that price signals higher quality. Post-Keynesian consumer theory focuses on the decisions that people make on how much money to spend on consumer goods and how much money to save. What is an interesting finding by an economist called Engel is the Engel curve, showing that when people get richer, the percentage of the income they spend on consumption declines, and hence a bigger percentage of their income they will save for investment, for speculation, or just to be sitting on their savings account. This diagram shows you the Engel curve. It has a negative relationship between income and the quantity of a good consumed. In other words, the higher the income, the lower the consumption of particular goods, relative to your income, of course. The absolute consumption when you're very rich may still be a lot. Rich people may buy 2 or even 3 cars. But as a percentage of their income, their spending on automobiles may be less than as a percentage of the income of poor people. For post-Keynesian economists, in order to do the comparison of how much money is spent on consumption and how much on saving, they use the concept of propensities to consume and propensities to save. The propensity to consume is a small c, and the propensity to save is a small s. Small c and small s add up to 1. That's logical because they are proportions. So if you spend 80% out of your income on consumption, then you've left 20% to save. The fourth theory of consumption that I discuss here is neoclassical economics. It's the neoclassical theory of consumption which concentrates on normal goods. And normal goods are goods of which you buy less when the price goes up and you buy more when the price goes down. That's why the diagram shows a negative relationship of the quantity you buy, the horizontal axis, and the price you're willing to pay, the vertical axis. Try to remember from your mathematics classes that a line has a slope. And we saw in the previous diagram that there is a negative slope of the demand function. That makes sense. When things become more expensive, you probably buy less of it. Now, the size of the slope is what neoclassical economists call the price elasticity of demand. That's the percentage change in the demand for a good in response to a percentage change of the price. The symbol is E, and E is the change in demand divided by the change in price. Next to the price elasticity of demand, there is also the cross elasticity of demand. Because normally you don't spend all your money on just one good, but you buy more goods. The substitution effect indicates that when the price of one good goes up, you probably buy less. Not just that good, but also of other goods, because you have less money available then. The income effect says that if the price of good X goes up, you will buy less of good X, or you buy less of good Y, or you buy less of the one good, but then more of the other good. The total effect of the cross elasticity is adding up the substitution effect and the income effect. Remember from chapter 1 that neoclassical economics relies on economic agents maximizing their utility. So they also maximize their utility from consumption. And they do so also obeying the law of diminishing marginal utility that we have discussed earlier in chapter 1. So the more you buy of a good, the less additional utility the extra units of that good provide. The table shows you the marginal utilities obtained from a piece of apple pie and a cup of coffee. Now, when you haven't consumed anything yet, your first choice will be coffee, not apple pie, because your marginal utility from coffee is 6 and from apple pie only 5. Now, if you have another £2 available, you will be wise to buy apple pie, because your first piece of apple pie gives you 5 utils, whereas your second cup of coffee gives you only 1 util. So the total utils out of 4 pounds will be 6 for a cup of coffee and 5 for a piece of apple pie, together 11. Now, if you found another 2 pounds, what would you buy, coffee or apple pie? Look at the marginal utility for 2 pieces. That's 1.5 for pie and 1 for coffee. I would go for the apple pie. The next table adds prices, and prices now are different. Apple pie costs 4 pounds, a cup of coffee costs 2 pounds. So we first have to calculate the number of utils per pound. So a piece of apple pie costs 4 pounds, gives you 5 utils, so that is 1.25 utils per pound. For coffee, the utility is 6. The cost is 2 pounds, which is then 3 utils per pound. So your first choice will again be coffee. You get 3 utils per pound spent for coffee and only 1.25 for pie. Your second choice will, like before, be apple pie, because you get 1.25 utils per pound for a piece of apple pie as compared to a second cup of coffee, which gives you only 1 util. But the next choice, there you're indifferent. For both consumer products, it is 0.5 utils per pound. Now that you understand the intuition of the law of diminishing marginal utility, I'm afraid I have to give you the equation. The equation says that the marginal utility of good A divided by the price of good A equals the marginal utility of good B divided by the price of good B equals the marginal utility of good C divided by the price of good C, and on and on and on. So when you maximize your utility for a big set of consumer goods, this is basically what you do behind your intuition of the law of diminishing marginal utility. The diagram shows utility functions or indifferent curves, but it also shows a budget line because unfortunately your budget is limited. You can only buy a particular combination of coffee and apple pie, but you can't go beyond your budget. So what you do is you maximize your utility given your budget constraint. So the highest possible point where your budget line touches an indifferent curve, that is the point where you maximize your utility. In this diagram, it's the point of 2 cups of coffee and 2 pieces of apple pie. Again, it's possible to give a mathematical interpretation, but don't worry, if you don't get it, you still will be able to pass your exam, because I will never ask an exam question to calculate marginal utilities or a marginal rate of substitution. So this is just for illustration, but you can just stick with the interpretation of the diagram. But for those who love the math, the slope of the budget line is the ratio of the price of apple pie over the price of a cup of coffee. Remember, the price of apple pie was £4, a cup of coffee £2, so the slope of the budget line is 4 divided by 2, which is 2. And we have to give a minus sign because the slope is negative. Now, how can we derive the demand for a good? Remember, in social economics, we did not do any mathematical tricks to find a demand function, because we recognize that demand is influenced by many social and psychological factors anyway. But in neoclassical economics, we only look at price and quantity from a utility maximization perspective. So actually, we can mathematically derive a demand function simply by finding 2 points that combine a quantity and a price of a good. For example, we know 1 point, that is 2 pieces of apple pie at a price of £4. Now, if we change the budget line, we can find another point for the demand function. Now, I will not go into the technicalities of this. Let's just move to the next slide with a diagram. So here we see the diagram with the initial budget constraint and a new budget constraint, a red line here. So now we have a new point of utility maximization, where the new budget line hits the highest possible utility curve. So we have the old point A and a new point B. So now we have 2 points of consumption of apple pie and coffee with their respective prices. This allows us to draw the demand function for each. This diagram shows the demand function for apple pie. Point A, 4 units and 2 units. 4 is the price, £4. 2 is the number of pieces of apple pie. Point B, there's a price of 3, and then you consume 2.5. So the line through A and B is now the demand function for apple pie.